Sometimes when we study literature and poetry, we ask ourselves what is literature and what is poetry. And it's not a stupid question because many authors tried to give their definition of what literature and poetry are, but I think only Ezra Pound got it right and gave the right definition to understand these concepts, these activities, these forms of art that we study as students of English language, but of course tell us something more. Ezra Pound, the poet that I'm going to discuss today, gives this definition of literature. He says, great literature is simply language charged with meaning to the highest possible degree, meaning that it is a form of human expression that gives words the exact weight that they should have, that gives words their maximum way of expression. And I think it's correct. When we study a work of literature, when we read Moby Dick or the Divine Comedy or the Quixote by Cervantes, we understand that language here is charged with meaning, that every word has a weight, has a power of its own. And I think Ezra Pound is right when he says that great literature is this. And talking about poetry, Ezra Pound was a poet. He believed that poetry was the form of verbal expression that most concentrated words and concentrated meaning. So that's why he decided to become a poet, because he saw poetry as a way to express concepts and ideas in the best and most effective way. Of all the literary figures of the 20th century, Ezra Pound is probably the most controversial because of his life, mostly. As an artist, his contribution to the development of English literature was huge. He was a friend of T.S. Eliot, Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, all great writers that became so thanks to the friendship and the suggestions and the editing of Ezra Pound. At the same time, Ezra Pound was criticized for his political ideas. He supported fascism during the Second World War, and he was accused of treason when he was captured in Italy and he was brought back to America. And after this trial, he was judged mentally unfit to be accused of treason, and so he was sent to a mental institution, a mental asylum, for 12 and a half years. I will talk about this period of Pound's life at the end of this video, because first I want to analyze Pound as an artist. And I think we should always divide the career of a man from his personal choices, even if they are, of course, correlated, and the choices that you make in your life influence your career as an artist and as a poet. But I think that with Ezra Pound it is too easy to jump to conclusions only by judging his political choices, his political support and his ideas. Because Ezra Pound is probably one of the authors that censorship has attacked more, and I think it is not fair for his achievements in poetry and the fact that he inspired a whole movement of artists and writers at the beginning of the 20th century and later on. So today I decided to select two poems by him. They do not belong to the Cantos, which is the masterpiece written by Pound throughout his life. It is a collection of poems correlated one another, but the two poems we analyze today are written before the composition of the Cantos. And the first poem we analyze is a war poem, so it is connected to the previous video, the war poets, because Pound in this part of a longer poem criticizes the First World War. And then the other poem that I decided to select is an example of Pound's literary current, which is Imagism, and we will analyze the aspects that characterize this poem to better understand the poetry of the 20th century, and this will be crucial in understanding T.S. Eliot, the next author that we will study, because T.S. Eliot will take Pound's advices and Pound's style as a model. The first poem that we analyze is taken from the poem Hugh Selwyn Moberly, and it's the second part, the final part of part 1, while the other poem, very short, is in a station of the metro that I will analyze after this first part. Now, this time we will proceed in a different way, because we are studying a poet of the 20th century, and so we have the luck to have Pound's own voice recorded while he reads this poem. So I will not read the poem myself. I will let Pound do it for us, and then I will comment on the different parts of the poem, and then we will analyze it together.
These fought in any case, and some believing, pro domo in any case, some quick to arm, some for adventure, some from fear of weakness, some from fear of censure, some for love of slaughter in imagination, learning later, some in fear, learning love of slaughter, died some pro patria, non dulce, non et decor, walked eye deep in hell, believing in old men's lies, then unbelieving, came home, home to a lie, home to many deceits, home to old lies and new infamy, usury age-old and age-thick, and liars in public places. Daring as never before, wastage as never before, young blood and high blood, fair cheeks and fine bodies, fortitude as never before, frankness as never before, disillusions as never told in the old days, hysterias, trench confessions, laughter out of dead bellies. There died a myriad, and were the best among them, for an old bitch gone in the teeth, for a botched civilization, charm smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes gone under earth's lid, for too gross of broken statues, for a few thousand battered books.
I think this lethargic, the hypnotic quality of Pound's reading is very interesting, and I wanted you to hear his own voice reading this poem because it's very effective. Let's analyze the stanzas. These fought in any case, and some believing pro domo in any case. What does it mean? These fought, of course, he's talking about these young men that decided to join the army and fight in World War I. These fought in any case, and some believing pro domo, meaning for their houses. So these people fought not for their countries, but for their houses, to protect their families. So the reasons are not patriotic and nationalistic, but very personal. Okay, and then in the next stanza we have, with the repetition of some quick to arm, it's an anaphora because it's at the beginning of each verse. Some quick to arm, some for adventure. Pound is listing the reasons why these people decided to join the army. So some quick to arm, so quick to take up arms and fight this war. Some people were keen on fighting. Some for adventure, and this adventure reminds us of Rupert Brooke, for example, that decided in a sort of romantic, idealistic way to join the army as a romantic hero. This adventure reminds us of this young man that decided to fight for an idealistic cause. Some from fear of weakness. So some people decided to fight because they didn't want to be seen as weak, as cowards. Some from fear of censor, again. Some for love of slaughter in imagination. So some people, because they thought in their own imagination that they loved slaughter, that they were attracted by blood, but then they realized, you notice, learning later, and then there's a suspension there, learning later what war was truly. So of course Pound here is implying that some people wanted to fight, they were keen to go to war, but then they discovered what slaughter really was. So they could not imagine before the massacres and the atrocities of World War I. Some in fear, learning love of slaughter, died some pro patria, non dulce, non et decor. So you notice, some in fear decided to join the army. They were afraid. Learning love of slaughter. And some learned to love the massacres, to love the bloodshed. And that's very, very powerful image. Died some pro patria, but notice, non dulce, not et decor. So it's not sweet and it's not honorable to die for your country. Pound is emphasizing this theme. walked, here the soldiers is the subject that is implied, they walked eye deep in hell, so with the eyes open into the abyss of hell. And here we imagine the trenches, believing in old man's lies. Then unbelieving came home. So first they believed in old man's lies, and here we can read perhaps the politicians, the governments, that they told them we should fight this war to gain our freedom, to conquer, to reach victory, and these are just lies that politicians, that the governments told them. Then unbelieving, so then they had a sort of, they experienced a loss of faith, and then they came home unbelieving these lies. Home to a lie, home to many deceits. Deceits are like tricks. Home to old lies and new infamy. So when they come back, nothing has changed. There are even more lies to the old lies, and there's a new infamy added to them. So Pound here is very critical to especially the propaganda behind war. And then he talks about usury. Usury, age old and age thick. And usury is one of the themes that characterize Pound's poetry. In this case, usury means the profits for the bankers, the profits that the bankers made through giving loans to governments to fund the war. And Pound is very critical against the usurers, against the bankers. Age old and age thick. So usury that has always been in this world, and age thick. So these old bankers giving money to earn more money back, and liars in public places. Again, a criticism to politicians. So Pound, differently from Wilfred Owen, that describes the war for what it was in the trenches with realistic details. Here, Ezra Pound makes a sort of social criticism, and he criticizes the people behind, in the shadows, becoming rich through the bloodshed, through the war. Daring as never before, wastage as never before. And notice now there is this repetition of as never before, this epistrophe at the end of each line, to emphasize what Pound is saying. Daring as never before. The verb dare is connected, remember, to Titanism, to the tragic destiny of the hero in the Greek tragedy. Wastage as never before. Wastage means the destruction, and of course it's connected to the wasteland, the next poem that we will analyze, written by T.S. Eliot. Wastage as never before. So Pound is saying there was never a war worse than this one. Young blood and high blood died together. So young blood, blood of young people, and high blood, noble blood, he's saying. Fair cheeks and fine bodies. So fair cheeks and fine bodies died in this useless bloodshed of the war. Fortitude as never before. Frankness as never before, and disillusions as never told in the old days. So this war changed everything. Pound is repeating this concept that the First World War changed the perspective of men from the 19th century and paved the way, we can say, opened the perspective on the new century, on the 20th century. Disillusions as never told in the old days. So there are no values anymore people can believe. Hysterias, trench confessions. Hysterias, probably it's connected to a mental condition, the post-traumatic stress disorder that the soldiers experienced during the fighting and after the war. Trench confessions, so confessions made in the trenches. Laughter out of dead bellies, and that's a very powerful image, and we will connect this use of images later with, in the other poem that we will study, to Pound's techniques that we will analyze in details. So laughter out of dead bellies, this laugh that comes out from the corpses, and it's a sort of way of mocking death, of laughing at the danger and how useless this death was. There died a myriad, so many people died, and of the best among them, for an old bitch gone in the teeth. So Pound is saying many people died, and the best people died because they were the young among them. For what? What was the purpose of this war? For an old bitch gone in the teeth, and this old bitch gone in the teeth, so with the rotten teeth, with this bad mouth, is of course a sort of allegory. We can think about Europe, we can think about their country, for a botched civilization. So for a civilization that was botched, so that was done badly, with flaws that could not be solved. That's a very powerful stanza, perhaps the most direct of the entire passage. charm, smiling at the good mouth, quick eyes, gone under earth's lid. So all these qualities, charm, these smiling mouths, and these quick eyes, these young, intelligent eyes, are gone under earth's lid. Lid, so like closed eyes, meaning that they are underground now, and the ground closes on the bodies like a lid, like an eyelid. So it's a very powerful image as well. For 2 gross of broken statues, so again, why did these people die? They died for 2 gross, it's a quantity, of broken statues, the statue rotte, so of statues that are now shattered. So what's left of Europe, just some statues that are broken, and for a few thousand battered books. This battered means worn, sort of overused, but also mistreated. And if these books are mistreated, it means that there is no love for culture. There is absolutely no love for the past. And this is the final image of the poem that closes the poem with this, again, emphasis on how useless the war was and how useless this death of these young people was at the time. Okay, so as we saw, Pound was very much against the war. In reality, to both wars. He was against World War I and World War II, even if he supported the regimes of the time. And in the next poem that we will study, we see in a better way Pound's technique. Pound belongs to the literary current of Imagism. We can say that he was the founder of this poetic movement, and Imagism is the direct evolution, we would say, of French symbolism and romantic poetry in a way, but it's a rejection of the romantic feelings of subjectivity, of pathos that characterized the 19th century. Imagism is a search for the exact word, for the right expression in the most concentrated form possible. In fact, one of the characteristics of the poem that we will analyze now is this concentration of the verses and this selection of the right word to express a particular image. And in fact, in A Station of the Metro is probably the best example to show you this technique that Pound adopts. Before jumping to the poem, I want to briefly summarize the points characterizing Imagism. The first one is the fact that the poet chooses common speech. The poet chooses the common language of everyday life, and also the poet uses the free verse, so not a metrical structure as for example in the 19th century or in the poems of the past. So he's free to choose the meter he prefers to express the idea that he has, the picture he has in his mind, in the best possible way. Then there is the free choice of subject. The poet can choose whatever subject he wants. There is no limitation to the creativity of the poet, and the poet can talk about everyday life, for example, can talk about modernity, can talk about the countryside. There's no limitation to the poetic matter, we would say. Then, of course, there is the search to find the best way to express an image, a picture. Poetry should be something hard, should be something direct, sharp. So not abstract and not too vague. Poetry must be precise in defining the poet's ideas. And then, of course, there's this search for concentrating, for limiting the number of words to use, because the more words you use, the less clear you become. So we will see these characteristics in the next poem that we study, and we will analyze then what the true message of the poem is. Because at the beginning, I don't think it's clear. It is so short and so fast that people may not understand what Pound really wants to say. Let's jump to the poem. Okay, this poem is called In a Station of the Metro, so it's the typical setting of modernity. We can say that the metro symbolizes a humanity that is going faster and faster, whose pace is going quicker, and the trains passing by represent this humanity that lives in the metropolis, that lives in the big city, for example London, Paris, and lives this life in a dehumanized way. Because this poem is about the dehumanization, the alienation of humanity. The poem goes like this: the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet, black bow. And the poem ends here. The poet is describing what he sees around him, and Pound talks about the people as apparition, the apparition of these faces in the crowd. So as if the people around him were ghosts. So they were not alive, they were dead. And these ghosts are in the crowd, so they appear in the mass, undefined mass of people, like petals of flowers. So petals are something that is ephemeral by nature. The petals of the flower can die very soon, of course. And these petals are where? They are on a wet, black bough. This bough means it's a part of a tree, it's a branch, and it represents, of course, it can be the train, it can be the platform of the metro, we don't know. But this bough is wet and black. So Pound chooses only these two adjectives to use in this poem, wet and black. And wet here means that this bough is wet, so it's probably in autumn or winter, right, after a rain. And it is black, so as if it was burned or it was dying. So the image is an image of death, right? These petals are on a wet black bough. So these petals are on a nature that is dying, that is going to be dead very soon. So the entire poem, which is just 14 words if you count them, is about the ephemeral nature of human life. People pass by in the metro station very quickly. If you've ever visited London or a big city with a metro, you will realize how true these words are. If you look around and you look at people's faces, they truly seem apparitions, right, in the crowd. So in this mass of people that are undistinguished. And of course the use of petals is also another powerful word choice, because petals, as we said, are elements that die very quickly. And so just like the train passes by very quickly and people catch it and disappear, the petals do the same, the petals on a flower. So as we can see from the poem, there is a very extreme concentration of words to express just a single picture. And that's the key element in Imagist poetry, to present a setting, a situation with very few words that are very powerful and that can evoke the image in our heads. Notice that In a Station of the Metro is just the result of a very long process of editing, where Pound selected and deleted many words before reaching this final form. So Pound doesn't write this poem deciding from the beginning that these 14 words should be the final draft, because Pound writes other versions of these poems that are longer and then gradually reduces the number of words used, because he wants to find, as we said, the exact expressions to define these concepts. The debate is still on whether Pound was really mad or no. We cannot say for sure. The psychiatrists define him as psychotic, mentally unstable, a person that could be distracted very easily, with the incapacity of focusing on one thing. And we have very different pictures of this man from the circle of his friends, from the artists that believed in his poetry and saw how good he was in using the language. They all said that Pound was not crazy, that he only had political ideas that could not fit in American society, that were extreme and radical. But if you think about it, also his poetry was radical and extreme. So I think Pound had a lifestyle that mirrored in a certain way his poetic achievements, or maybe it's the other way around. His poetic achievements mirrored his extreme view on economics, on politics, on life. And I think we cannot answer this question of whether Pound was really crazy or not. But what we know is that he left works of poetry that are still fascinating and interesting to study, and also that without Pound we would not have had people like James Joyce or T.S. Eliot that later became some of the most famous writers in the English language. So thank you for watching, and next time we will start studying T.S. Eliot. But before introducing the author, we will discuss modernism as a poetic movement, which is the evolution, of course, of Imagism, and we will define some aspects that we will find then in the poem written by T.S. Eliot, The Waste Man. Thank you for watching. Till next time.